only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
All right, what's up, A-Pushers? Today we're going to go over Franklin Delano Roosevelt, president from 1933 until his death in 1945. Before we get through all the content, a couple things that you need to know. Number one, he is president during some of America's most trying times, during the Great Depression and also through World War II. And the second thing that you need to know is that he drastically changes the role of the federal government forever. From the New Deal to present day, things have changed. So before we get cracking here, let's with World War II and all that stuff that you probably are so interested in, let's go back over the Great Depression. Number one that you need to know, when FDR is elected president, Herbert Hoover is trying to run for president and he's not being very successful. He gets blamed for the Great Depression. And so in his inauguration speech, he gets up on the podium and it was a dark, cloudy day in the sky. The clouds go apart and FDR stands up and gives the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And he starts sparking confidence with the American people. All right, so a couple basics about the Great Depression that you should know from the last guy, Herbert Hoover. Cause of the Great Depression: number one, overproduction. Number two, easy credit. And number three, the stock market crash of 1929. FDR is going to give Americans a new deal. Remember that his cousin is Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy Roosevelt had a square deal that was all about CCC, corporations, consumers, conservation. Or FDR, it's about relief, recovery, and reform. Relief, helping people out. Recovery, fixing the economy. And reform, making sure that you create laws so that this never happens again. You have 25% unemployment for white people looking for jobs. It's 50% for minority groups. All right, so the first New Deal is to help the economy and the banks. The banks were failing all across the United States. The second New Deal is to help people for the first time. All right? It is now the government's role to fix the economy and to help people out. Over here you have alphabet soup. These are all the New Deal programs: the FDIC, the CCC, the SEC. And basically they fit perfectly with the first New Deal and the second New Deal. Help the economy, help the banks, help people. All right, fireside chats is what FDR does to spark confidence with the American people. Remember, there's no television yet, and a lot of people don't know that FDR has polio because who gets to really see the president on a day-to-day basis? And so he speaks to the American people and inspires confidence in them. A couple other things that you need to know, and then we'll move on to World War II stuff, is FDR has a black cabinet, meaning that he meets regularly with African Americans to find out how we can help them, which is a huge transition from what anyone had done before. And this is largely sparked by his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. There's also the Mexican Repatriation Act, which forced Mexicans to go back to Mexico, and their land was taken and it was used for white people. But for the most part, Mexicans left on their own free will. The economy is really, really, really bad, and so they book it. The Roosevelt recession, it's 1937, as Adolf Hitler is housing the Olympics in 1936. FDR is dealing with another recession, and this brings us to Keynesian economics. After the recession in 1936, Americans from 1936 to present day start using Keynesian economics, and it sounds kind of counterintuitive, like it doesn't make sense, but it really does if you think about it. If the economy is bad, the government will spend. We will create programs. We will lower taxes. We'll try to get money flowing. If the economy is good, we will raise taxes and we will decrease spending. So it's the opposite of what you would do. If you're broke, you're not going to go spend a bunch of money at the mall, but that's what the government will do. Create programs trying to spark the jobs. All right, and the last thing here is court packing. FDR and the Supreme Court, led by William Howard Taft, the former president, now Supreme Court Justice, they are at odds with one another. They consider the New Deal to be unconstitutional, to be doing things that it's not supposed to do under the Constitution of the United States. And so they say, look, your New Deal is unconstitutional, and FDR is like, my New Deal hasn't done enough. And so FDR and Congress are going one way, and then you have the Supreme Court that's going another way, and FDR threatens the Supreme Court. He doesn't actually do it, but he threatens, and he says, if you guys don't start voting my way, then guess what? I'm going to add my buddies onto the Supreme Court, because in the presidential powers it says I have the power to nominate Supreme Court justices, and guess what? They're going to vote yes. The American public is kind of outraged at this. Congress isn't very happy about this, and he kind of backs off, and Congress starts voting for the New Deal. So that's the Great Depression in a nutshell here. We're going to continue on with the World War II stuff, kind of lump it all together in the next installment in our video. Cool. Have a good day. Welcome back, A-Pushers. In the last video, we covered FDR and the Great Depression, all the nuts and bolts and things that you need to know. Now we're going to get started on World War II and all the stuff that probably brought you to these videos in the first place. Number 2 is the thing called the good neighbor policy. You need to remember that during the Great Depression, starting with Herbert Hoover, there was the Goodwill Tour, and he went around to Latin and South America and said, you know what, the Monroe Doctrine no longer applies here. If you guys want to have crazy governments, if you want to do your own thing, that's fine. We've got our own problems up north. Latin and South America, you're on your own. The good neighbor policy is basically us telling Latin and South America that if they need any help to come to us, we will help them out. Remember that as this is happening, it's 1933, fascism has already started to kind of take over in parts of the world. The idea is surfacing there. Manchuria has already been invaded. And so we have a good neighbor policy because we see the world going fascist and we don't like it. It makes us feel uncomfortable. So we say, if you need anything Latin and South America, come to us. All right, the neutrality laws are very easy. Remember that George Washington's foreign policy was don't form political alliances and don't get involved in foreign affairs. We kind of messed it up with the Spanish-American War and World War I. But now here we are trying to avoid getting involved in a world war. It's 1935. And the neutrality laws go as follows. The first neutrality in 1935 said no weapons to belligerents. Belligerents are people that are at war with one another. We will not give you any weapons. The second one in 1936 said no loans. We won't even give you money. If you're at war, we're staying out of it, because if you remember all the wars we get involved in, we're basically trying to stay neutral and we get suckered into it. All the way from the War of 1812 to the Spanish-American War, World War I. We get caught in the middle. And the next one is cash and carry. Cash and carry means, all right, we will give you supplies, but we're not putting them on our boats. You get your little boat, you bring it over to the United States, you pay us cash, and then we'll put the stuff on your boat and you take it back. So if it gets blown up, that's your fault, not ours. You can't blame us for it. All right, we gave you this stuff. So it's the foreign policy. No weapons, no loans, and then it switches to cash and carry. If you look down here, though, it's going to switch to lend-lease because it's 1941. Europe has fallen to fascism, and England is the only country hanging on for dear life. And so we will give them supplies. We will give them everything. We will lend them stuff. You can give it back to us later, and we will lease you stuff, meaning you can pay us a little interest on it. Now we segue into the rise of fascism. Okay, fascism is extreme nationalism plus extreme beliefs plus a totalitarian state. So you have a totalitarian state, basically, plus extreme beliefs. We are superior. Our nation is better. Our religion is better. Our way of life is better. Okay? It's not patriotism. It's extreme nationalism under a totalitarian state. Okay? So we've got 3 dictators that we need to know, 3 fascist dictators. The first is Benito Mussolini in Italy. Okay, he takes power in 1922. Adolf Hitler is going to be inspired by the black shirts, the fascists in Italy, and he's going to take power in 1933. And then you're going to have Emperor Hirohito, but under him, Hideki Tojo is going to take power in Japan. So basically what you need to know is that the fascists in Italy under Benito Mussolini do the March on Rome in 1922. Benito Mussolini tells the king, basically, you step down, or me and my black shirts will take matters into our own hands. And the king steps down, and Benito Mussolini is now in charge. Okay, that's 1922. Then in 1935, he does the invasion of Ethiopia, and the League of Nations does nothing to stop this. And that is going to inspire Adolf Hitler. Long story short about Adolf Hitler, he becomes chancellor in 1933. He was in charge of propaganda before that, was in World War I. He is originally from Austria. And what he does is he sees that the League of Nations is weak and has no power, and he wants to make Germany great again. And he has his own vision of what this entails, and it basically means conquering Europe out of revenge for what they did under the Treaty of Versailles. So Adolf Hitler, the first move that he's going to make is in 1936, and it is going to be the Rhineland, which is the area between Germany and France. And the League of Nations is unhappy about it, but they don't really do anything about it. They don't stop it. Hitler kind of moves with his army and takes it over, and it's like, whoa, what just happened? Hitler just took the Rhineland. Okay, well, you can't have anything else. The next move that Adolf Hitler is going to make is to his home country of Austria. He annexes it, and there's not violence, there's not bloodshed, but the Nazis roll in, they're waving their swastika flags, Hitler is being greeted with flowers and, you know, mothers with babies. It's a very easy takeover, it's not bloodshed at all. Following that, Adolf Hitler is going to ask for a part of Czechoslovakia, and Czechoslovakia is a country that was created out of German and Austro-Hungarian Empire territory in the Treaty of Versailles. So Hitler thinks that Czechoslovakia and part of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, belongs to Germany. So he asks for the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia, and he says, can I have, I'm going to take this. And for the first time, Europe and the League of Nations say no. And Neville Chamberlain flies to Munich, meets with Hitler and says, you can't have it. And Hitler says, you have a choice. You can either give me the Sudetenland, or I will take it by force. If you want the bloodshed of thousands of people on your shoulders, then you be the one to stop me right now. Because we all know what happened in World War I, and you know that the Treaty of Versailles was wrong, and you know that the people living in the Sudetenland are mostly German. And Neville Chamberlain says, well, yes, that's true, but, and long story short, there's a big compromise, and what happens is the Munich Pact. The pact is that you get the Sudetenland, Hitler, but you promise that you leave everything else alone, you won't conquer any more territory, and Hitler says, I promise. Of course, he's going to break that promise. All right, he's going to break that promise a couple months later when he moves his tanks and blitzkrieg army into all of Czechoslovakia, and Neville Chamberlain will be fired, and Winston Churchill will become prime minister. And next, the thing that will happen is in 1939, Poland is going to be invaded. There's an agreement between the USSR under Stalin and Hitler. They are going to join together and attack from either side, and Poland is invaded, and they get to split Poland 50-50. All right, there's other things that happen. Long story short, basically here's what happens. There's a little bit of period of time after Poland gets invaded where nothing happens. It's called the phony war, but then it's like boom, boom, boom. Netherlands, Finland, Holland gets conquered. France gets conquered in 1940. And then all of a sudden it's the Blitz in 1941. And England is holding on for dear life, and we start the policy of Lend-Lease. And then Hitler will direct his attention to Russia, and he will start the extermination camps and the concentration camps. And it's going to be bad for anyone living in Poland or in Russia. Extermination will begin under the Nazis, under the SS. All right, that was a lot of information, I know. But next up, we're going to talk about Japan under Hideki Tojo. He is the Minister of War. And basically, long story short, here's what happens. 1931, Manchuria is invaded and the League of Nations does nothing. Okay. So 1937, the Panay blows up and FDR says, we're not ready for war, we're not ready for war. And he gives his quarantine speech saying that the rest of the world, look what's happening. We've got fascism spreading. The world needs to unite. Don't think that this Western Hemisphere will be protected forever. All right. Following 1937, guess what happens? Well, there's an invasion of North Vietnam by the Chinese, and the United States officially cuts off all interests in Japan. Remember that we've been involved in Japan really since the 1850s. And now we cut off all ties to them. They no longer get any loans. We lock their bank accounts. We ship no more steel to them. And Japan is basically a little island. It can't do too much. And so they are very, very angry with us. And peace negotiations start, but then they stop. And then later on, Japan is going to invade all of Vietnam. And we sit down with some negotiations. It seems like Japan's finally going to let up, but then they have a plan, which is the destruction of our naval fleet at Pearl Harbor and in the Philippines and all of the allied forces around Japan, so they can have a complete takeover without any resistance. All right, so bottom line, that is what you need to know. And then, obviously, I hope that you know, December 7th, 1941, the United States is attacked at Pearl Harbor, and World War II has begun for us. It started in 1939 for Europe, and it starts in 1941 for the United States. Real quick, these notes don't take very long at all. The quarantine speech given by FDR in Chicago, he basically says, look, it's nice that Chicago built this nice bridge that connects North and South Chicago, but the reality is that in the world today, there is fascism rising and the nations of the world need to unite. Don't think that we're going to be safe forever. The Selective Service Act happens in 1940. Selective service is a fancy word for the draft. And the United States creates a draft because we are afraid that this war could get us involved pretty quickly. So it's better to be safe than sorry. The four freedom speech basically is in retaliation all this fascism going around. It's very similar to the quarantine speech. It says that in America and capitalism, we have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Things that fascism does not hold. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion. You have a lot of things that you want to do under fascism, but you can't do. You want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, you want to have a different political view, well, you can't have it. And obviously fear and fascism go hand in hand. Our foreign policy changes after 1940, changes to lend and lease. We will lend things to England, we will lease them. We're not involved in the war yet, but you can very much see where our alliance lies. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. World War II will last from 1941 for the United States to 1945, but do remember in Europe, it starts with the invasion of Poland in 1939. So 1941, Pearl Harbor, 1945, the dropping of the atomic bomb, and World War II is over. Moving into the conferences. Basically, all the conferences involve FDR and Churchill meetings. Some of the conferences involve Stalin as well. So long story short, here we go. The Atlantic Compromise happens in 1941. It's FDR, Churchill, and what are they talking about? Well, it's clear that World War II has begun. What is the World War II aftermath going to look like? Who's going to be the big players in the world? And it's very clear that it could be the United States. All right. The Washington Conference, it's FDR and Churchill, and they're meeting in Washington, D.C., and they are talking about strategy for the war. All right. Stalin is involved in the war. He's our buddy. We don't trust him, but he's our buddy in this war. And he's saying, you need to open a new front. And we say, we agree, but Europe maybe isn't the time and place to do it yet. And so we agree that we're going to open up a front in Africa led by Eisenhower and led by George S. Patton. The Casablanca happens in Morocco. It's virtually the same thing as the Washington Conference. They're talking about strategy, and they're talking about maybe opening a new front. The conference number 4 is in Tehran, which is in Iran. And basically what happens is that the United States is going to meet with England, and it's going to also meet with Russia. You're going to have Stalin, Churchill, FDR meet together, the big three as we call them. And they're going to meet together and they're going to talk about, yes, we will open up a new front. We will do it, and we will do it in an undisclosed location right now, but basically it's going to be D-Day, June 6, 1944. It's going to be the invasion of Normandy, and the agreement is that the United States and our allies agree to attack at Normandy and defeat Nazism. Well, Stalin will help out with the war in the Pacific. They also agree that there will be an international body, the League of Nations, created. But at the Tehran conference is basically just kind of talks. There's going to be an organization, but they don't know what it's going to look like. Bretton Woods is different from the rest. It's not people coming together that are presidents and leaders of their country, respectively, but it is diplomats and ambassadors. 44 nations of the world are going to come together, and they're going to meet in New Hampshire in Bretton Woods, and they're going to talk about what is the international economy going to look like after the war. And they create the International Monetary Fund, which is in charge of tariffs and interest rates and all kinds of wonderful things. Because you don't want to have an economic situation after World War I, which is very bad, and countries resort to communism and other forms of government. The Yalta Conference, if you have been daydreaming through these conferences, Yalta is the one that you must know. It is imperative that you know it because it changes everything and it directly connects to the Cold War. You have the big three meet again, Stalin, Churchill, and FDR. They're going to meet in the Ukraine, Yalta, and there's a couple things that are discussed. Number one, it says that Germany after the war is going to be divided into 4 parts. One part run by the United States, one part run by England, one part run by France, and one part run by the USSR. Okay? Basically, it's going to segue into East and West Germany. There's also an agreement that Poland is going to be watched over by Russia, and eventually Russia will give them democratic elections. And also, under the Yalta Conference, it says that the USSR will help out with our war in the Pacific. So you put all those things together, ladies and gentlemen, and you have yourselves World War II and the Great Depression. There is a lot of content there. I would strongly encourage you to take time, study the notes, make sure that you really absorb it, because you know that it's going to happen on the exams that you're going to take. So I wish you all the best, and may the force be with you.